Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Please be seated. There's a story to tell the Mountain Ash. We have dozens and dozens of stories from First Nations peoples in that have been collected. They're easy to find. You can find some of them online. Or we use at least one of them in that. We try to anyway for this Standiong Stones service at 9:15. And one of the things I want to do is take this story and do what the Jesuits, the Black Robes, did back in the 1630s and 40s with the Huron people, what the Jesuits did with the Sioux people in the 1890s, and missionaries all across, actually, North America. They heard these stories of these people, learned their culture in that, and some of these stories, they recognized that there's wisdom and truth and beauty in them, but it was also, they used them as ways of explaining something that's in the gospel. Okay, so they would use this to explain, you know what you're talking about there? You know, this really sounds an awful lot like the gospel I grew up and I given my life to. This is how it is, and they would explain it. This story is a great example of this. You're wondering why we chose this story and what this has to do with church, or perhaps even Remembrance Day, and it's quite easy. Last century went through a great winter, a tremendous winter. A winter that was unlike. The snow piled higher than ever before. Darkness, fires ebbed. It was difficult to hunt. And when it was over, we found mounds of the dead. We were stunned to see how many had died. 115,000 from this country. 60 million worldwide. And we have these days to remembrance, and this is the reason we're doing this Remembrance Sunday. The UK, we're probably slipping into this. We're going to be probably doing this more and more as a church. Churches in the UK and Australia and New Zealand, they are having Remembrance Days, Remembrance Sunday. So the Sunday closest to Remembrance Day is the day when we formally do this sort of thing in our churches, and that rather than having a separate Remembrance Day service, because a lot of them now take place in Sanitas and outside. So anyway. So today, Remembrance Sunday, we're gathered here and we remember these dead, and we take them and we hold them up. This story, they found the dead and they took them to the most sacred tree that they have, the ash tree, and they lay the bodies there. And they take the blood, put it onto this tree, which is a curious thing. And then, of course, we have these berries afterwards. So what's going on there is the dead are presented, gathered here, their blood is taken, and as a result, something is given back that sustains everyone. For us, one of the things that happen to Remembrance Day is we have this, staggering death. I look at this church, we have names around here of about 70 or so people in that passed away in the wars of the past century. And that's more than are sitting in this room right now. And I still find that I don't know how the parish went through losing 65 in the First World War. The parish is a lot bigger than it is now. There was, we had the parish roll that had 1,200 and stuff, but we were having about 400 or 500 people at church on Sundays before the First World War. That's a sizable chunk out of that group, but that's how the younger generation of men. 20s and 30s, and I'm not sure how many actually served in this congregation and that, but a lot didn't come back. And so we have memorials on that. We want to remember that this generation was desperate to remember their sons and daughters who had fallen in that. And part of it, though, too, is there's this idea that this had to have meant something. That there has to be something that comes out of all of that death, these wars, that sustains us today. And so we often talk about the freedom that we enjoy in this country, the fact that we are able to continue in our own specific way of life, and we give thanks for that. So this is a day when we remember the dead, but we also at this time also give thanks. Thanksgiving for the many blessings that we enjoy in our current society and that, and we relate it to that sacrifice. And it's not a lot different than this story here, where animals are taken and their blood, this horrible winter has passed, and something came out of it that was something that sustained people in the future. We have something from all of this that sustains us in the future. So the two stories, there's a weird parallel. I picked it up, and that's why I wanted to share that story with everyone here this morning, and that, because I think it goes to the heart of what we think about on this day, and that we are very cognizant of the fact we just got through an awful winter. The dead was heaped up. And we tried to remember them, and we look and seek something from all of that that sustains us and keeps us alive this day. It has to hopefully have meant something. One thing out of this whole thing is the idea that out of death, out of great sacrifice, we get something that sustains us. And I think one of the things tied away in all of this, and we have this in the Gospels and that, and the Gospels, of course, are very aware that there's going to be times of darkness and wars and things to come. And Jesus tells us not to worry, he will sustain us. He will sustain us in the midst of all of that. And that was something, the experience of many people who served in that, is they felt sustained through all of this darkness and that. I always find it interesting to hear about how many people had services before battles, after battles, sometimes during battles, did morning prayer, had chaplains, prayer, shared in the sacrament, did all of that in the midst of all of this, and felt that God was looking after them, that felt that they were being sustained in the midst of all of this. And for some people, I've talked to today for their time of service in the wars of the past century, that was a time of actually a very religious time in their life. They felt actually very strangely close to God and to their fellows. Maybe there's a coincidence there. But they felt tremendously close to other people in that, and they felt sustained by God in whatever form in that. They did feel sustained by God. And I think that's really important for us to remember and learn from this, is that we who wonder if God is looking after us, in actual fact he is. And we remember that those who served felt sustained. We continue to feel sustained and looked after by God. At the end of the day, we are people who woke up this morning and get to eat berries. Ash berries. And we don't take that for granted. I think that's another thing hidden away in this story, is the idea of not taking that for granted. All of these things, many of their stories point out the fact that very little in creation is to be taken for granted, that there's actually a reason or a purpose. It all ties in together in some way, and nothing is too small to be forgotten or disregarded. It all matters, it all fits together in some way in that. And so for us, I think that's really an important lesson for us to learn as well in that. But I think part of it is the fact that we are sustained by a loving God who cares for us, that this day we get to share in berries, and that after a very, very long winter. And we are very grateful to God for all of that, and that we are sustained and held up this day and forevermore. Amen. Please stand.